What's up everybody, how's it going? It's Beck, aka Dan's Weight here, and welcome to the next Final Fantasy Attack Only adventure on the channel. I've had some really fun experiences trying this type of challenge out across the Final Fantasy games. We have done Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy VII, and Final Fantasy VIII up until this point, where each game has been its own adventure, and I've had a really fun time investigating whether or not it is possible to complete these games using either some kind of auto battle or an attack only restriction. And so from the games I've done so far, there is of course one glaring gap, and that is Final Fantasy IX. The reason why I hadn't done Final Fantasy IX up until this point is because there is already a video of this that's been done by a content creator called Primal Liquid. Definitely worth checking that video out if you want to. He has done a video called Can You Beat Final Fantasy IX Using Attack Only? Now up until this point I'd never actually watched the video, but I thought to myself I'll just do some other Final Fantasies after doing the auto battle of Final Fantasy X, and I hadn't really seen it be done for Final Fantasy VIII and all of that stuff, so I prioritized those titles. But then I decided to have a look at his video, at least the start of it, to see if he placed any other rules on it and how he actually conducted his own test of whether you can complete the game. And what I noticed from the first minute or two was that he stated a rule, which was that he will allow the use of magic stones in order to, of course, help with a myriad of situations like giving yourself protection against darkness, or to give yourself auto potion, and all of that kind of stuff. Now, this made me think that I might be able to put a little bit of a unique spin on the challenge by trying to do it for as long as I can without using any magic stones. So this is a bit reminiscent of how I did the Final Fantasy VIII challenge, in which we tried to do it with no junctioning at all for as long as possible, and I ended up getting surprisingly far, and the really severe restrictions ended up allowing me to use some pretty unique strategies and ideas to make progress, and in turn I learned a ton about the game and had a really fun time investigating it. So that's why I still decided to go with Final Fantasy IX, even though a video does exist for it. And so for my own kind of curiosity, I want to investigate, can you complete Final Fantasy IX with attack only without using any magic stones either? And so that's going to be the first phase of this challenge, where we're going to see how far we can get with that. Much like Final Fantasy VIII, if we run into like an insurmountable wall where we really need to use magic stones, then we'll start to break down some of the barriers. But the primary goal is to see how far we can get by truly just doing attack only and not using any benefits that the magic stones can give us. So that's going to be our starting point. As always, the first episode is going to require a little bit more explanation, a little bit more setup, but hopefully you guys will enjoy this one too. I do genuinely think that this could also be a very interesting playthrough, and I'm very curious to find out how far we can go. As always, please remember to hit that like button, especially on this part 1. If you don't do it for the rest of them, it's not a big deal, but especially for that part 1, I would really appreciate it. And do remember, as always, there is early access available on Patreon, so you can see these ahead of time, and also get to support the channel in a massive way, and to help me continue to make these wacky series that take a lot of time behind the scenes to put together. So without much further ado, let's get into it and begin the challenge. And so we'll begin with the first battle here, and one thing that you're going to immediately notice is just how slow this game is. It's the kind of thing that when I was first playing through Final Fantasy IX, I never really noticed that much. I had relatively minimal experience with like old school Final Fantasy, anything before Final Fantasy X, and so it didn't feel that slow to me. But having played more of the other games, Final Fantasy IX is definitely pretty slow, and so that's something that I guess I'm going to have to get used to. But thankfully, especially outside of battle, we do have the fast forward function, and so of course for a lot of this stuff there's going to be a lot of dialogue and a lot of traversal and a lot of movement, and so I'm going to be using this tool to obviously skip through as much of this stuff as possible, because the challenge is going to take quite a long time and I need to make progress as quickly as possible. I am playing Final Fantasy IX using the Moguri mod. It was already installed beforehand, so I didn't kind of uninstall it. It's the Steam version of the game with the Moguri mod added on top. One thing I've noticed so far that I'm struggling with a little bit is that I do have things like save editors, which are obviously going to be useful, but in terms of things like trainers / cheat engines for me to be able to make on-the-fly adjustments while I'm actually playing the game, Final Fantasy IX isn't quite as well equipped as Final Fantasy VIII was. And so certain things are going to be a little bit more time consuming for me to kind of alter and tweak. But I will, of course, always be disclosing if I've kind of used a cheat or a hack in order to speed up a grind or to get through something. Another area in which Final Fantasy IX is going to differ already from the other games that we've tried so far is that we're going to have 4 party members on the front line, which is going to already be quite interesting. Obviously, my assumption is that that's going to give us a little bit more of an advantage, but I don't know how well the enemies are going to be scaled in terms of, say, their HP or their defense when they're facing a team of 4 instead of 3, which tends to be the standard for games after Final Fantasy VII, at least. Especially for the early phase of the game, Final Fantasy IX is another one of those that has a very slow start in terms of boss battles and actual action. There's just a lot of dialogue, a lot of walking around, a lot of story, a lot of cutscenes, and so basically what I did while playing through is that I had my usual kind of source for this kind of stuff. I use a website called jagged.com, and they have brilliant guides for all of these games where you can basically follow it along as you go, and it will tell you literally every single item or chest available as you play through. And so especially for a challenge like this, I always try to make sure I pick up everything that is possible. So every item, every treasure chest filled with gil, every accessory, every piece of equipment, because I know that they could come in handy in the future. So as I'm talking about stuff, sometimes in the background I will show pickups that I've gotten, and other times I'm just going to obviously show a setup to you guys, and anything that you see in that setup I'll mention where I got it from if I haven't already shown it in the video. So in terms of general playstyle, that's what I'm going to be doing, because one thing we will be able to do in this challenge that we didn't really have a chance to in Final Fantasy VIII is once again start to make use of armor and accessories. The reason Final Fantasy VIII was so brutal without any of the junctioning was because it basically removed any kind of ability for us to add any kind of benefit or buffs to our stats or our characters. But with Final Fantasy IX, even if you don't use the magic stones, which are obviously going to be hugely beneficial if and when we do use them, we have accessories and we have armor pieces in place that can at least give us some benefit. So for example, you can pick up something like a rubber helmet, and that's going to reduce your lightning damage by 50%. In Final Fantasy VIII, you didn't have the ability to do that, and in Final Fantasy VII, you had the materia to be able to help reduce your damage, depending on which pieces of materia that you had. So I'm hoping that it's not going to be as hardcore as 8 in terms of the restriction, but because those magic stones have such powerful abilities, I do predict that eventually we're going to run into something where attack is just not enough, and we're going to have to use magic stones in order to give ourselves a chance to make progress. But for now, that is the general idea. So let's move ahead to where things actually started to get more interesting in terms of battles. Especially right at the beginning, there's a few like set piece battles where basically there's no way to really lose, that's not a problem. But one of the main things that I'm kind of sad we're going to miss out on is, of course, the fact that we cannot use the steal command. One of the best ways to pick up good weapons and armor and equipment early on, like earlier than you can buy them from the shops, and of course sometimes stuff that you probably can't find in the shops, is to be able to steal them from bosses, and that's obviously something that we're going to miss out on. With regards to healing and that kind of thing, as I have done for basically every single one of my auto battle / attack only challenges, I will allow item healing outside of battle. So that's what we're going to do. Obviously nothing but the attack command is going to be selected in battle. We can either stand there and do nothing, just wait, so no skipping, no defending. We can wait, or we can attack. Outside of battle, you're allowed to use the triangle menu to use your potions and Phoenix Downs if you need. So with respect to that, the rules are the same as they always have been. Now, the first time I did this little thing with Blank and Zidane, I forgot that there is actually a little mod that you can do to change it to the PlayStation buttons. This currently has like the Xbox buttons, I think. And as a result, I did mess up a few times. I think with the X button, I'm so used to seeing the blue X being obviously like the south-facing button on the PlayStation controller. Every time I saw the X pop up, I was hitting the wrong button. And so I didn't quite get the absolute top prize for this, but the one that I did get, I think, was still relatively okay. As a result of my performance, I got something called a silk shirt, which is what I ended up preferring anyway. If you get 100, you get something called a moonstone, but at the moment at least, it didn't seem to be that important to me, so I kind of left it at that. I didn't try the challenge again, and I didn't really do any kind of gil farming here. We'll talk more about gil and that kind of stuff later, But for now, it was all very pedestrian. Pushing through a little further into the story, and of course we have the first fight against Steiner. This is not going to be a problem. I mean, obviously, it's another one of those. It's basically more of a set piece than anything. But it's going to be nice to have him on the team because he is definitely a powerful attacking character, obviously. And so when we're trying to build like our kind of best team, I assume Steiner is going to be there. So we're going to be able to recruit him soon. But early on, at least, of course, we're not going to have too much choice about which party members we're able to use. So we'll see how that's going to go. But for now, I was obviously glad to get Steiner on my team as soon as possible. So now we have Steiner Mark II. I kind of left the fast forward on here. I was pretty much assuming that this was another battle that's pretty impossible to lose anyway. So I continue to just target Steiner here, and there's no problem. So I think from these, again, you can steal if you had the ability. But obviously for us, it's not going to be much of a factor. Another interesting thing here is that we do have the front row, back row mechanics, and that's something I'm definitely going to be using. And you'll see kind of as we move forward how I use the rows and who I place there and why. But for now, it's pretty smooth sailing. It's already been like probably, if you weren't using speed up, it's probably already been like 2 hours, and there's been nothing really of significance yet. But once we enter the Evil Forest, that's when things are going to finally begin to get more interesting. Okay, so this is what we are working with. Zidane is at level 1 with 105 HP. I'm going to talk about like stats and level increases and that kind of stuff very soon. But for now, obviously, the first thing I wanted to do was just head out there and just make a beeline for the next boss and just see how far we can get, basically. And so now we have our first random encounter of the Final Fantasy IX Attack Only Challenge. And we have an old favorite of the Final Fantasy series. So you see how slow that ATB is going up. I put it on the fastest speed and that's still how slow it is. It's kind of insane. But there you go, one hit KO. That's always what we like to see. Obviously in an Attack Only Challenge, I think that's a good benchmark. If you can get close to one hit KOing stuff, that's pretty great. But the damage I took was relatively significant. Again, once we start comparing across games, that's when things get quite interesting for me. So as we look at Zidane's stats here, which we're going to get much deeper into very soon, but he took 22 damage there, which was about a fifth of his maximum HP. I remember when we started Final Fantasy VIII, even though we couldn't kill things in one hit like the first random encounters, they were doing such little damage that it was basically as good as nothing. These guys, I wouldn't say it's nothing. Like they hit relatively hard, considering what we've seen in some of the other games that we've started so far. So I made it up to level 2, I healed up, and straight away we're heading in towards the first true boss battle of the game, where it's pretty likely that you'll get a game over if you don't do the right thing. So Garnet is trapped and we have to try and free her from this cage with Steiner. So let's see how this is going to work. The first major boss. Normally in attack-only challenges, obviously the game starts off so simply that just attacking the first boss in many cases should be enough to get you the win. It's also a trance tutorial, so here I'm going to talk about trance. For this one, basically my plan is it's not the same as limit breaks in Final Fantasy like 7, for example. So for 7, I disabled the limit gauge with like a mod because it forces you to not be able to use the attack command. But for Final Fantasy IX, when you're in trance, you can still just use the attack command. So for now, I'm not touching trance. It does give you obviously a bit of a physical boost in terms of how much damage you do. But I feel like it's so kind of built into the game, and you can continue to just attack, that I will allow trance for now, and we'll see how it goes. So 68 damage, 50 from Steiner, which is pretty good considering he's not in trance. And well, trance barely lasts for like 2 or 3 turns, especially at this stage, so I do think it should be allowed up until now. The reason I never allowed the limit break in 7 was obviously because you're literally using a different move than attack, so I'm not disabling trance for that reason. So pretty consistent from Steiner, 66 or so damage from Zidane, but no sign of anything here. We haven't won yet. Because of course, they keep talking about healing Garnet, and that's something we cannot do in this challenge. And so watch what's going to happen now. Absorb comes in for the third time, and we've already run out of time, and we failed the first legitimate boss battle of this game. And so I thought to myself, well, this is a nice start, because what the game obviously wants you to do here is to acknowledge that Garnet is having her HP drained, and you're supposed to like throw a potion on Garnet so that she can heal. But due to the rules of the challenge, we cannot do that very fundamental thing that the game wants you to do, and so the game is punishing you by saying, well then, okay, you can't just blast through the battle and completely ignore the point of it. And so we took an L on our very first legitimate battle of the challenge, and so it was pretty concerning. I thought to myself, okay, already we have a grind here, because there's not really too much I can do. I calculated the damage that I did, and then I looked up how much HP this particular enemy has. And the answer was 513 from what I'd looked up. And I added up the damage that we did, and it wasn't like I was one critical hit away from winning. I either needed multiple criticals, maybe like 3 of them, or I had to get stronger. And so this was where already a lot of research and grinding had to begin for me in this challenge. So let me break down the general journey here, because this actually took me hours before I even got through the first legitimate boss. And once again, I had to do some learning and understand how this game works. And I'm going to try to convey what I learned. It's not super deep or complicated, but it's just stuff that me, as someone who's a very casual player of Final Fantasy IX, that hasn't done much in the way of challenges for it, just didn't know before starting this challenge. So the first thing I did was obviously just get myself into encounters and see if we can find a sustainable farming loop. Now what I mean by this is that we don't have the benefit of something like Final Fantasy X, where you can just grind in an area, and if your HP is low or if any party members get knocked out, you just go to a save sphere, and then you can just instantly revive your characters, heal your HP, and that creates a sustainable farming loop. But for some of the older games, you have to use something like a tent, or you have to use obviously potions and that kind of thing to heal your characters. There's no like free healing depending on where you are in the game. And so this was one such section where, for example, if let's say I couldn't receive any potions from the kills that I make in my farming attempt, then there would come a time where I would take too much damage and I wouldn't be able to heal myself. And so let's say I'd be able to have 15 or 20 battles, and then I'd run out of healing stuff and I wouldn't be able to regain any of it. There's no shops, there's just nothing I could do about it. And so first of all, I wanted to see if I could sustainably heal here and basically figure out how much damage I was taking from enemies. So the first piece of good news was that I could create a sustainable farming loop here, because I wasn't taking a huge amount of damage and I was getting potions dropped by the enemies. It wasn't like every time, but it was happening consistently enough that I could just about basically heal the damage that I was taking by getting potions as a spoil from the battle. And so the first thing I tried to be able to get through this fight was to obviously level up Zidane a bit more, because we can't do anything about Steiner. He kind of comes into the battle afterwards. Zidane has to be the one doing more damage. And so I decided to hang around and just start repeatedly fighting the Goblin and the Wolf type enemy here until I increase my level a little bit. And so after maybe like 3 or 4 minutes, just a very small grind in fast forward mode, I got myself to level 3. And my general approach to these challenges is always I try to do the minimal amount of grinding needed to get through, and then we see how things go. And so I was taking it in like increments. I was like, okay, level 3, Zidane must be stronger now, his HP's gone up. Let's fight again with 2 more levels and see if maybe I can get lucky with a critical hit or something like that, because if we have 2 higher levels, we're in trance and we get a critical, that's going to do a lot more damage, and that might get me over the line for this first boss battle. And so here we go with attempt number 2, and Zidane is now at level 3, so he should be a little bit stronger than he was before. Let's see if it's going to help us kind of get over the first hill that we've encountered in this challenge. Unfortunately, the ATB seems to always start the same place for this fight, so you can't really get a bit of a like advantage where you have an almost full ATB to begin. So Zidane's going to come in, and the damage looks the same. and Steiner can miss, which complicates matters as well. So the miss is definitely very annoying anyway. But I was like, wait a minute, why is Zidane doing the same damage again? 62, he's doing even less. And I'm like, hold on a minute, why is this happening? This guy is a level 3 now, but he's doing the same or slightly less damage. Like, this doesn't make sense. Something's not right here. And so I ran into my first kind of educational moment in this playthrough. Because, again, everyone who knows the game well and understands the leveling up and the systems and stuff obviously already know what the problem is here. But for people like me, it was like, huh? The problem is that the growth system in Final Fantasy IX is a little bit different to the other Final Fantasies. And the way in which it's different is that what you get is a relatively minimal level of passive growth, which is basically growth just by virtue of going up a level. But the way you can enhance this growth is by having certain things equipped at the point of leveling up. And so that's the kind of unique hook. And that's how you end up with different stats at level 99 based on what you've been equipping along the way. And so once I found this out, I was like, oh shit, this is a problem because this is so early in the game that he doesn't have any equipment. So what I did, I looked up a list of all of the accessories and equipment in the game. And thankfully there's a nice list that shows you basically, depending on which piece of equipment you have, how much benefit it gives to each stat at the point of level up. And so when it comes to these, there's so many combinations and so many options that I'm not going to get like specifically into details here. But that is the general idea, and basically nothing that Zidane had at this point was going to give him any extra benefit at the point of leveling up. And so the idea was to not waste level ups here, because let's say you could theoretically grind him up to level 99 here, but the stats you'd end up with are going to be much worse than if you kind of did the grind with the optimal pieces of equipment. And so that's why it created a bit of an issue of, I have to level up, I need to do more damage, and the only way to do it is by leveling up, or relying on very rare criticals, which we'll also talk about. But I don't want to level up too much, because I want to do as many level ups as I can with better equipment. And so that's the kind of problem I faced very early on in this playthrough. But then you might say, yeah, but he did level up to level 3 and he didn't get any benefit. He was doing exactly the same damage. And the level up system, as I say, they give you like a pretty limited passive amount of growth. And so what happens is that every time you level up, your HP will go up regardless. So regardless of any modifiers, what you have equipped, you will get a baseline increase in HP for every level up that you get. But unfortunately, for stats like strength, you don't get like a +1 every time you level up. It doesn't work like that. And so what it means is that for strength specifically, every 3 levels you go up, you gain 1 extra strength point. And so that's generally how stat growth works. And that's also why when I attempted to fight the second time with my kind of level 3 Zidane, I ended up doing exactly the same damage as I did before, because his strength stat was literally the same. And so this was far from ideal, but I basically had no choice. I already had to start grinding from the beginning, otherwise there was just no way to get through. And so this obviously was not ideal, because to even get like +3 strength points to start seeing a bit of a meaningful difference, I would already have to gain 9 levels at this pretty early stage, and I was kind of not looking forward to having to do that. So I thought to myself, what about critical hits? To what extent can I rely on them? Because one thing you've also seen in the Attack Only adventures is that I use the word RNG very often. And good RNG can often mean basically getting critical hits in the fight. And I thought to myself, maybe it's not that hard to get, say, 2 or 3. If I do like 15, 20 attempts of this fight, I'll get one where I have like 3 critical hits, and I'll just be able to get through and focus on the leveling up later on. I had a look at the mechanics, and as it turns out, you basically don't have that great of an opportunity to get a critical hit. So it's based on your spirit stat. So when you're going to attack in battle, it runs a calculation, it looks at your spirit stat, and it divides it by 4. And so, for example, at early levels, Zidane has a spirit stat of 23. If you divide that 23 by 4, you get 5 point something. And in these games, usually it's the case that if you get a decimal place, the game will round down. And so you get basically a number of 5. Then it compares this number to an RNG, and that RNG runs from 0 to 99. And depending on what number comes out from this RNG, if it's less than your spirit divided by 4, then you get a critical. So for any given attack, Zidane has a 5% chance of scoring a critical hit, which is of course pretty low. And so this meant that over the course of a fight where you only get to have 3 or 4 hits, that wasn't a great chance of even getting 1 critical per fight, let alone probably the 3 or so that I would have needed at the baseline stats. So I basically decided that relying on criticals and trying the fight like hundreds and hundreds of times is not the way to go here. I'm better off just kind of biting the bullet, doing a little bit of early grinding, get up to say level 12, 13 where I can start to really see an increase in my stats, and then we'll have another go and see how things are going to work. And so what I did was make myself a little chart of Zidane's kind of strength and attacking stats and all of that kind of stuff, and I tried to find what would be the ideal place to be at. I did all of this manually to start with because what I wanted to do again was to see how much gil I was getting and whether this was sustainable in the long run in terms of the items I would receive from the enemies. And so thankfully with fast forward it wasn't too horrible. I didn't spend like 8 hours grinding or anything. It took me maybe like half an hour, 45 minutes of actually just kind of grinding to get to the kind of levels that I wanted to. And so here is when the frustration began with this particular battle, because I spent some time and I got myself up to level 10. And at this stage I kind of realized that the growth in stats is so slow that even if I got to something like level 10 or level 12, I'm going to need a critical hit at least to be able to win this fight. But I thought 1 critical hit is definitely doable if you have enough attempts. I just didn't want to need multiple hits. And so after some more testing, even at level 12 with another strength point, I just couldn't do it because the increase in damage just by having 1 more strength point is so incremental, and there is a decent amount of RNG difference that you basically kind of not only need to go up a strength point, you need to get the upper end of your RNG, because let's say, I don't know, at level 10 you do 70 to 80 damage, at level 12 you do 74 to 84 damage. So there's a chance that if you're unlucky, even though you have the highest strength point, you basically don't do any more damage than you were doing before. And so it ended up becoming pretty nasty. And again, I was fighting the battle to level up as little as possible, but the game was making it incredibly difficult for me to do that. And still, despite everything, I thought to myself, it's better to do this than to try and rely on having multiple critical hits in the fight, because that would just take hundreds and hundreds of repetitions, which I didn't want to do. And well, to be fair, for future boss battles as well, obviously being a bit stronger is surely going to help me, because at this stage he's already up to 683 HP, but the damage output is so limited from the boss. It's just about the speed, the strength, and the spirit stats. And so what I did was push to level 14, and with level 14 I had 24 speed, 26 strength, and 12 attack. And it was at this stage that I finally had the following attempt. Okay, so here it is, the winning attempt against Prison Cage, level 14 here. That is what was needed, so level 14 plus a critical as well. Obviously, again, everything's in fast forward at this stage. I'm just like racking through the attempts as quickly as possible to get that 1 critical. And I need it while he's in trance too, by the way. If the critical comes outside of trance, it's another failed attempt. And so thankfully on the 3rd and final trance hit, he did get a critical, and we got the job done. And so yeah, it was a pretty long start, even though the game clock doesn't show that long. Behind the scenes with all the like tweaking and researching and testing, and well, the game is on fast forward. It took me a few hours to basically get through even this first boss, but already it helped me to learn a few things about the game. Now, it's a back-to-back boss. Vivi is now trapped in the cage, but the one benefit here is that Vivi is casting magic. So obviously I'm not controlling Vivi, so there's nothing I can do. It's an attack-only challenge, but obviously Vivi is technically breaking the rules. But since he's not a character controlled by me, then obviously, you know, we keep moving, and we just we take the benefit as it comes, obviously. And so as a result, this makes things much easier. When you have an extra 80 damage coming in, even with the absorbs that's happening to Vivi, we still have enough time to basically get the job done and make sure we get the win. It's not a problem for this particular party to take it out. Like, you don't need critical hits or any of that kind of stuff either. And so thankfully, after the painful start that we had, we finally started to make a little more progress, and we could start to move beyond the evil forest. One interesting thing to note here, though, is that the battles themselves against bosses, they do not give any experience points. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It doesn't really matter too much to me in this particular challenge, but I did find it quite interesting. They only give you AP, which obviously benefits the magic stones, which we're not using yet in this challenge. So we'll see how that stuff pans out. But for now, there's a really big level gap between Zidane and Steiner. So that's good for Steiner, because at the end of the day, I might be able to equip him with some better stuff and give him a little bit more benefit as he gets the levels up. But it was kind of interesting to already see such a big gap between the two. But to what I'd seen, at least, it seemed very necessary to give Zidane some more levels to be able to beat that first cage. And so from here, it's mostly story, picking up chests. We do have the fight against Baku, but again, it's basically a formality, especially now that my level is much higher than it should be for this section. And so that's not a problem. We're going to start moving things along towards the next battle. At this stage, Vivi has joined the team as well, so we have the Steiner, Zidane, and Vivi team. Now, look at Vivi's HP, it's all the way down at 60. And of course, since Vivi is built to be a black mage, in terms of it being an attack-only challenge, he's not incredibly helpful, at least at the start. So we might be able to equip him with certain things that get his strength up once our levels get higher, but especially like at his base natural levels and the early levels, he's not going to be much of an asset in terms of his physical attack power. Now, I decided that based on my experiences from Final Fantasy VIII especially, which was far and away the most difficult one of these attack-only challenges, if you can have some characters that can take some hits for you, even if they're not producing much output themselves, so for example the petrified characters that I had in Final Fantasy VIII, that can definitely help you win the fight, because in this situation, obviously it's going to be Zidane primarily, and then Steiner that's going to be our damage output guys. So since Vivi's not contributing much anyway, the more hits that he can take away from Zidane and Steiner, the more beneficial he's going to be. So I decided to put Vivi in the back row for this reason. Because he's basically, yes, he's going to have his damage output halved, but he's barely doing any damage anyway, so it's not going to make a huge difference from what I can see. So I want him to survive as many turns as possible and just remain on the back row. So that's how I set things up. Obviously Zidane and Steiner on the front row, and Vivi on the back, hoping that he can survive maybe an extra hit or two as a result of being at the back. And so eventually it was on to the next boss with this three-man team, and it's against Plant Brain. Brilliant name for a boss battle. This guy has 916 HP, and we will see if the investment that I made in Zidane early on, because he's at level 14 now, is that going to be enough to basically overpower the Plant Brain and get through. So let's have a look at this fight. Nothing too fancy going on in terms of equipment and stuff. It's still early days, so there isn't really like a ton of equipment to pick up right now. I will start to show that a little bit more as we move on, but I need to get out of here first. So yeah, we did have a couple of random encounters, enough for Vivi and Steiner to at least get one level up. But we get hit with an attack called Pollen, which gives everybody darkness. And so, yeah, in an attack-only challenge, darkness is one of our least favored options. But Steiner did make the hit there, as you guys saw earlier, so that was at least something. But Zidane has missed both of his, and so it's going to be a bit of a pain to try and take out 916 HP when you can't see anything. So we'll see the status effects in terms of, like, do they expire? What is the deal with them? How frequently can you still hit when you have, for example, the darkness effect? So far, we've not managed a very good strike rate. So I haven't looked up the numbers for this one yet. It's one of those where if I was failing the battle as a result, then I'd probably look it up, but I'm still like landing enough hits here and not taking a huge amount of damage and getting enough turns in to think, okay, I can probably still just about squeak through. I mean, at this stage, Zidane's already basically a tank. I mean, he has like 4 times the HP of Steiner and like 6 times, 7 times the HP, or more than 7 times the HP of Vivi. So this was a big problem here, the thunder hitting everybody. And then Blank joins the crew. And so this is another reason why I didn't overthink this fight too much, because I knew that Blank was going to come in and help us out as well. And this is the benefit I was talking about earlier of potentially like having the 4-person team being favorable for attack only. And so of course you have one more option for that attack output. And maybe the enemies don't scale, like, you know, extra enough to still make it favorable for you to have the 4-person team. Because I do remember in general Final Fantasy IX not being the hardest of games for the story. So Vivi gets KO'd here. Steiner does have a rubber helm, that's why he's taking less damage, by the way. If you're wondering why Steiner's still alive here. Already certain accessories are making a difference, and Blank comes in with the hit needed to get the job done. And so there we go. We managed to do it thanks to Blank, but the darkness status continues on outside of battle as well. So we had it throughout the fight, it didn't expire, and that means that in battle, if we get hit by darkness, we're going to be in big trouble. So we will have to see if there's going to be equipment and accessories that we can equip to at least protect us from that, or if we're just going to have to ride our luck with darkness and the RNG. So during this escape, I kind of forgot to run, and so I got into this encounter with Vivi already KO'd and Steiner in trouble, and I thought to myself, oh shit, is this one of these where I have to basically reload the save now because I screwed up? But thankfully, even with darkness, you're seeing that I was able to make enough hits. So it could have been a very dangerous situation, but I managed to make it through. Yeah, I'm making use of these potions that I picked up during my grinding sessions, and I decided to ride my luck a bit. I mean, I got through that first fight so easily that even with darkness, I could probably make it through, because there's going to be points in the game, as we all know, where basically you kind of get a clean slate. The game gives you like an automatic tent, basically. And so I thought the less eye drops, the less tents, the less of those kind of things that I use for now, the better. And so I thought, let me just try and get to the finish of this particular segment, even with 2 of my characters blinded. Because I knew Blank was there, and I thought to myself, these guys are not going to be enough of a problem. So as you're seeing, you're still making enough hits, and 1 hit is enough, even from Steiner at like level 3 to get a 1-hit KO. That's fine. And so with that, I was able to basically complete the Evil Forest section finally, and get through the first like legitimate area of the game with like random encounters and boss battles and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was a tough start. Had to grind a little bit, but I ended up making it through, and we can now progress on to the next part of the game. And so finally, we make it out to the Greater Mist Continent and onto the world map. This is great. It was so refreshing after spending so many hours in the Evil Forest to finally be able to get out here. This of course starts to give us a little more freedom in where we can go. We of course have random encounters that we can farm with. Many Final Fantasies do have these like natural spring waters or like holy water or whatever you want to call it that can heal when you touch it. And so we're going to start to find things like that later on too. But for now, I didn't have too much to do. I just wanted to get into a random encounter to see where I was at, and then basically just move straight on, because I'd already done a whole bunch of grinding early on. And I thought, like, especially with Zidane being as powerful as he is, we should be fine. But first, party check. We do have Garnet finally joining the party here, and she doesn't have the greatest attack or strength, which is also not surprising, since she is the white mage. And so I basically employed the same kind of idea with her. I put her on the back row along with Vivi, so they're mostly there to try and basically tank hits, while Zidane and Steiner do like the bigger damage. So that's the general idea that I had for them. For now, obviously, again, as I've been saying, the equipment is very limited, but we're going to hopefully get a lot more options as we continue on. And so here is our first encounter on the world map with a full 4-person party. Let's see how this goes. Again, because of Zidane's stats being high relative to everything else, I thought worst case he should basically solo this pretty easily. It can take one of Steiner's hits, which was not that promising. But this is a great example also of how little like the natural stat growth kind of makes a difference. So yes, obviously Steiner has naturally better physical attack stats than Zidane does, but the difference in their damage is barely like 10. And there's an 11 level difference between them. And so you would imagine that being like 11 levels higher, he should be doing, I don't know, maybe double the damage or something like that, but it's not even close. And so we have to try to make sure that we have some good equipment to help boost our attack power, basically our strength and our spirit and our speed if we can, as we continue to move forward. So yes, it is straight into the ice cavern. Let's see what happens in here. So one problem I'm going to be having is that in general, as I've been saying, I'm going to try my best to get all of the chests and items and stuff as I go along, because there could be valuable things in there that will make the run more possible. But this comes with the problem of triggering more random encounters than you normally would if you just stream through. And so once again, I had a decision to make about whether I allow myself to escape or not. For now, I decided to just allow escapes because it helps me to continue to make progress. And especially once you realize that the random encounters are not that difficult in an area, it just becomes more of a time drain and a resource drain than anything. I figured basically like I'm always going to be able to have enough heals there. It's just going to waste my time a bit more. And so let's see these random encounters. I want to make sure I can actually fight them. But in general, I'm basically allowing myself the ability to run from them. It gives me a little bit more control over the leveling up as well. Like I'd rather try to keep my character's levels low, especially in these early stages. And so that's a general rule that I have for now. I'm not too worried about not allowing myself to escape here. Like you can see even for this one random encounter, because he did the HP switch as well, it took a little bit of time. But also, I have a pretty healthy amount of gil due to that early grinding. It's going to be definitely useful later on when it's time to be able to buy equipment and synthesize and that kind of thing. But yeah, that encounter was relatively difficult, and that's mostly because, again, like the level ups that Zidane has had is not as beneficial as you think. Like you would just imagine that being like 10, 11 levels higher than his peers, he should be just one-hit KOing everything at this stage, because he's like, there's no way you should need to be a level 14 at this point. But it's not as clear-cut as you think. Like the HP scaling is definitely OP, and that's definitely going to help me a lot, but the kind of power scaling is relatively weak, I would say. So this is another random encounter. I thought even one of these guys took quite a long time to defeat, so it's going to take me a while to beat both. And this was the first time I got to see how the escape truly worked here. This is bad because it's some games, once you try to escape, it's very easy. Like 95% of the time, you just press the buttons needed to escape and you get out. But some Final Fantasies, they make it much harder and you're more likely to get stuck here. And so I thought I have a save nearby here anyway, and I thought let's just see how long this is going to take. And you can see sometimes it takes a really long time to escape, and it ends up being a worse idea. So I got the same encounter again, and this time I managed to instant escape. So it's a little bit inconsistent in terms of how the escaping works, and so it's something I generally had to try and be careful of moving forward. I was able to pick up a Mage Masher, which was definitely helpful. Anything that increases my attack stat is definitely going to be useful, and so that was a nice little pickup there in the Ice Cavern. Here is a different random encounter to what you guys had seen so far. I want to try and, of course, show you guys some of the random encounters too, and not just skip everything and assume that I basically beat everything. But a nice 104 damage there, thanks to the slightly improved weapon here. You can start to see the difference appearing a little bit more. Obviously, the being a high level is one thing, but once you start getting superior weapons as well, it can start to make a big difference. So now he is doing double the damage that Steiner is. So the extra attack power definitely showing up here. And there you go, the level's starting to slowly come up as well. A little later on, I picked up a leather wrist, and I definitely wanted to equip that because it gives me a little bit more spirit, and of course the evade and magic evasion. If at any time it gives you a level up bonus, I'm going to include it as an annotation in editing because there's just so many variations of it. I can't keep them in my head when I'm doing the voiceover, and so I'm going to add those in as an annotation. But definitely some of these pieces of equipment are going to be helping when you level up. So the way it works is that basically they give you like a bonus, and so let's just say one will give you a +2 bonus for when you level up for your strength. This doesn't mean that when you level up you go from like 24 to 26 in one level. It just means that like you will incrementally increase your strength more. So for example, every like 10 levels you'll have 2 more strength if you have this particular accessory equipped. So it helps like the stacking over time basically. And so you're not going to see like an immediate boost, but it will give you benefits longer term. So the longer you keep them equipped, the better it's going to be for your stats. And so eventually you end up with the next significant boss battle of the game, and this one is against the first Black Waltz, of which of course we're going to meet 3. But this one summons a friend in the form of Sea Lion. So let's see how this battle went against Black Waltz number 1 and Sea Lion. Black Waltz himself thankfully only has 229 HP, but Sea Lion has 472. And so for a solo fight, if you weren't at this kind of level, then you might really struggle against these guys. So I probably would have needed to grind if I was still somehow here at like level 4 or level 5 or something. So that's one thing, and 2, we are facing a more dangerous attack than before. So I didn't heal properly before this fight, which was not smart. I kind of overestimated my HP here. Took 36, that's fine, I wasn't too worried about that. And 104 damage is pretty nice. So 229 for the Black Waltz, that's going to take 3 hits. And then we have to deal with Sea Lion. And we enter Trance, which is great timing here. So this is one thing that in general I haven't been doing like deliberate prep work on. I've just kind of been fighting wherever I want to fight. And whenever Trance triggers, it triggers. I've not been kind of trying to optimize for it at this stage. But of course, when it does come along, especially when you're more powerful, it's really helpful. So Blizzard gets upgraded to Blizzara, which does 63 damage, but with our own upgraded power here, it's going to be very helpful. But the speed is quite interesting. I took 2 attacks in a row there. So now I was worried that I'm not going to have enough HP to survive. And there was another 168. Sea Lion has 472, and so I basically needed 2 more hits here. So in comes Tsunami, the big move, 81 damage. And so if I get hit with 1 more Tsunami here, I'm going to die. Let's see what happens. 116, so I need to make 1 more hit here without dying. Does it use Tsunami? It uses Wing. And so thankfully, I'm able to survive, and I get the job done. So even if I didn't have a Trance in that fight, as long as I had full HP, I would have been able to survive. And Zidane at this stage is really showing off the fact that he is pretty OP for this area. But as I say, I reckon if I was down at like level 4, level 5, I think then I probably wouldn't have had enough to win this fight. So basically the grind that I did early on was a little bit annoying in the Evil Forest. But ultimately it kind of leveled out because I would have probably needed it to some degree anyway against the first Black Waltz. And so with that, I can make it out of the ice cavern. And so now I am going to end this first part with something very, very important. We get to name Garnet, and so this gives me a redemption chance. Years ago, when I did my commentary playthrough of Final Fantasy IX, I got to this part of the game for the first time, never played it before, and I thought to myself, okay, this seems to me like some kind of temporary kind of fake identity, and eventually people are going to call her by her real name. And so when I got the option to name Garnet, I didn't like the fact that she wanted to call herself Dagger. I was just like, come on man, like we can do something more fun than that. It's going to be temporary anyway, so we're just going to change it. And so me being me, I gave Garnet a name that references Final Fantasy X. And there is a Final Fantasy X character called Elma. And so at the time I was just like, yeah, you know what, let's just call her Elma. Who cares, right? It's just going to be temporary. We'll go back to calling her Garnet, and I'll probably still call her Garnet anyway. And what I didn't realize was that this name is the name used for her for the entire game. And so in hindsight, given that it became such a meme on the channel and something so fun, I have zero regrets. It's a lot of fun. But if it was just me purely playing for myself, and I kind of realized I could never change her name later, that would have been something I regretted and I got annoyed by. And so for this particular series, I get a chance to atone for my previous kind of noobish error of naming Garnet something that I didn't realize was going to stick till the end of the game. And so surely this time I'll be able to give her a better name that will be a superior option for the rest of this playthrough. And so with that, I am going to end this first part of Final Fantasy IX Attack Only. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. As always, the first part is a little bit slow because Final Fantasy IX itself is a bit of a slow game to start in terms of its gameplay and its boss battles and stuff. And there's always a lot of explanation and laying down some groundwork, laying down rules, explaining how things are going to work and how I'm approaching the series. But I'm hoping that it's going to be much like Final Fantasy VII and VIII, in the sense that it's not going to be like a super long 15-part series like Final Fantasy X was. Going to do my best to try and keep it to about 6 to 8 episodes and get everything wrapped up. So we are going to start to speed up more in the subsequent episodes. So I hope you guys have enjoyed it and are having fun jumping back into Final Fantasy IX, because it's a great game that I don't get to cover quite as much as some of the others from the Golden Age. And so I'm very much looking forward to playing more of it, especially in this unique challenge format, and continuing to investigate if we can complete this game with attack only, and how much of it we can complete by not using any magic stones. Thank you guys so much for the support. If you want early access and to support series like this, if you're enjoying yourself, please check out the Patreon, and I will see you guys soon. Thank you for watching. Take care.